The USC Eyewitness platform does not only contain video testimonies with Holocaust survivors, it is also now home of a prestigious project of the USC Shoah Foundation named Dimensions in Testimony. Users can actively interact with survivors. They can ask questions and get tailored answered, both based on a complex language detection system as well as an algorithm that connects questions and answers. Dimensions in Testimony is intended to preserve the personal interaction with survivors for the future.
The Holocaust is an undeniable and horrific chapter in human history in which 6 million Jews and countless millions perished in genocide and crimes against humanity during the Second World War. Dimensions in Testimony is a new format of interview by which you can ask your questions of a Holocaust survivor who has videotaped answers to many questions, so that the questions that you have will be answered directly, in person, life-size and 3D.
What was life like before the war?
I had a very happy childhood. I loved to be together with my family.
We understand very well the power of conversation between Holocaust survivors and the younger generation. We've seen it in our schools, we've seen it in our universities. That conversation, that moment of dialogue where I ask my question and I get it answered, is just it's magic in the room when that happens. And we wanted to try and find a way to preserve that as best possible. What's wonderful about conversing with these Holocaust survivors in this interactive form is that it's about you. It's about what you want to know. Conversation allows you to learn in a way that most suits your interest, and that's where the deepest learning takes place.
Do you feel hope for the future?
I always feel hopeful. If I wasn't hopeful, I wouldn't be talking to you or anybody else about my experiences.
I'm very happy that I was able to survive.
And here I am. I was one of the lucky ones.
The questions that students have is what's driving the learning experience. And so we know that this is important because we're going to enable them to be able to learn through their own curiosity. We are almost out of time to have deep conversations with Holocaust survivors. If we don't have these conversations now, they will never take place.
According to Amit Pinchevsky, the novelty of this project is the entirely different logic of media of testimony it introduces by utilizing more fully the affordances of digital technology. He explains that by combining human-computer speech interaction with three-dimensional holographic imaging, the project promises to create an immersive experience of a live conversation with survivors long after they are gone. Thereby, the project simulates interaction. What we see here, according to Pinchevsky, is interaction rather than narration, which becomes the premise of this new approach to Holocaust testimony. However, on the Eyewitness platform, the simulated survivor testimonies are embedded in a complex lesson structure, which reflects especially about the character of conversations, about the specifics of human interaction, and which also reflects what it means to pose questions within an interview setting related to the Holocaust. So before users actually engage with the survivor in a simulated conversation, they should think about their understanding of human conversation and reflect about the specific historical background, but also the setting of this testimony. Pinchas Gutta was one of the first survivors who was recorded with this specific technique. Pinchevsky describes this process of filming in his book Transmitted Wounds the following. Gutta spent 5 days of filmed interviews in March 2014 answering several hundred questions presented to him by Stephen Smith, Executive Director of the USC Shoah Foundation. The questions were collected from experts in Holocaust and genocide studies, history, trauma specialists, and Holocaust Museum education staff, as well as from specifically targeted audience of teachers and students who had been asked to supply questions after watching a documentary about Mr. Gutta. A second round of interviews was conducted 5 months later, following initial system trials. Gutta's responses were then integrated into a human-computer interface to create what dimensions and testimony designers call time offset interaction. The new form of testimony is explicitly related to the more classical video testimony. This is especially done by referring to specific techniques of questioning and to the specific nature of interhuman conversation. Dimensions in Testimony explicitly tries to simulate this particular setting of an oral history interview.
And then ask for the Trullant recipe.
According to my documents from post-war, I was born in 1932, but on the 21st of July, 1932. But Hasidim used to take a long time sometimes before they registered your child. I'm not sure why. Because I found out that the 21st, I remember the 21st of the date of my holiday, but the 21st was actually the 6th day of Tammuz. So I always remembered the 6th day of Tammuz. So how the 21st and exactly the exact date when I was born, but it's within 6 months or within 9 months or something like that. That's more or less. But my official birthday after the war was the 21st of July 1932. And I think it comes from documents that came from the Warsaw Ghetto when my father told me. But in actual fact, if you looked at the documents from Buchenwald, I told them in Majdanek that I was 5 years older. I was tall. So actually, I was born in 1927, according to the German documents. So the date of birth is not 100%, but it is my official date of birth.
And you were born in?
I was born in Lodz, actually Łódź, L-O-D-Z, and I lived, until 1939, approximately November 1939. I lived in Łódź, in Zachodnia number 54, Zachodnia. That was the street we lived in.
And this is a I don't know if this is a tricky question, but when did you first realize that you were Jewish? Is there because we all grow up and we're in a family and we're not aware of, but was there a moment when you realized that you were growing up in a Jewish family?
I don't think so. I don't think there was a moment, because I think I was born into a family where you were Jewish automatically. In other words, it wasn't something that you acquired. You were Jewish. I mean, the fact that my memory when I was a year and a half old or something like that, and I was still crawling underneath my father's table when he was chanting and studying the Talmud, you know, I mean, how more Jewish can that be? I never even, maybe I was made conscious that I was Jewish when I was growing up, and sometimes, you know, I had these blonde payas, you know, side locks, and sometimes when I was in the street, some Polish Christian boys would play and come and run and pull it and say, Judith or Palestinian, Jews go to Palestine. So, you know, I was made conscious that I was slightly different maybe, but it didn't affect me. I never experienced anti-Semitism really. You know, people always ask me that question, did you experience anti-Semitism? Well, I experienced certain things that happened, but I didn't personally feel threatened by anti-Semitism when I was a child before the war.
After introducing this classical form of video testimony, users can now switch to the interactive mode. Nevertheless, they are again reminded of the specific structure of conversation and the specific logics of an oral history interview. So we get certain tips how to have a meaningful conversation, that it's necessary to have background, and this was also of course the reason why several videos introduced the life and biography of Pinchas Kutta, but also to know the historical context and to focus on specific topics. Users should also be aware about what kind of questions they ask. So we see here that it's recommended to ask open-ended questions, and other tutorials emphasize that the questions should be what and how and when questions. This of course is not only due to a specific conversational flow, but also because this makes much more easy to connect questions with answers through an automated algorithm. Now the simulated conversation starts. The system offers the possibility to press a microphone button, record your own question, and then have the virtual survivor answering. The first question I asked was about how he experienced liberation.
When we woke up in the morning in Theresienstadt, we heard that the gates were open and that the
It's possible also to follow the written transcript during
the Russians
the testimony.
So that's how we knew. And then as soon as I got up, I had enough strength to run out, and I ran out, and I saw a very sorry sight of men, old men, women with children, trundling, kids, little, kind of any kind of little conveyance, cots and children's vigalach, and while they were moving, we learned that these were Germans and that the Czechs were expelling them because these were people that were settled by Hitler and the Nazi regime in Czechoslovakia, where they made a lot of the area, free of Czechs, and they resettled Germans in that area. And I also noticed them being abused by the Russian soldiers, by other people. They were hit and they were being robbed, and they were hurting. They were suffering, And I felt extremely sorry. When I saw these people suffering, I felt sorry. It didn't even enter my mind that these were Germans and that, I suffered at their hands for 5 years, this infernal sufferings. But when I saw these human beings, regardless that they were Germans, I felt very, very sorry and sympathetic. And when in the evening, we discussed it in Theresienstadt. Some of us, some of the younger people, we talked about it because I told them, and some of them, of course, were completely, uninterested, but quite a few of them felt exactly the same. So I think when you suffered and you see other people suffering, it is almost the empty.
Although working quite well, the flow of the interview is of course also marked by certain interferences that are an effect of the online streaming as well as the digital content and the necessity to match it. The next question which I asked was about the first thing what he did after liberation, and in the transcript now we see that the transcript, so to say, it visualizes a particular dialogue or dialogic scenery here by also including the questions into the automated transcript.
Well, the first thing was you rushed out because you wanted kind of breathe in the freedom. You wanted to kind of get a few lungfuls of air, which was free. You weren't constrained, you weren't a prisoner, you weren't tortured. And then a feeling of liberty, that you were a person, you became a human being. People were concerned about you. People wanted, gave you food. People clothed you. People made sure that you had place where you could clean yourself. You started becoming a human being, and it was an incredibly wonderful feeling. And also, you became active. For example, I immediately became a somebody in the sense that I made myself busy. I got horses. I got a wagon. I started working. I was an active person. I was interacting. I was running towards in the farms, getting fruit and other good food that the Russians, obviously didn't bring. They gave us basic food, and I would bring it, and the people that were recovering from typhoid or sick people or people that needed it, I would go and distribute food that nobody refused me when I came to a farm. I got milk and I got meat and I got whatever I asked for, I got. There was no such thing as refusing a prisoner from Theresienstadt who came with a wagon and horses. Of course, I didn't rob anybody. I just asked nicely. So I got, I got peaches and I got fruit. I got everything that was possible to get, and I would bring it. And that made me feel good because I was doing things. I was active and I was positive and it was, and you can't imagine how, and I made the horses my family. I cared for them.
Obviously, there are several potential answers that can be used randomly to similar questions, like how he experienced liberation and what he did first. The next question which I asked was about his opinion to films about the Holocaust.
It's a very difficult
question
to answer.
And another interruption.
Whether books and films are important. I think books are important, films are important, but one has to be very careful what kind of, what one reads and what one depicts. The people that make the films or write the books, if they are academics, I mean, if you read books about the Holocaust survivors' experiences, and you read their what happens to them, I think that's an important document for the future, for study, for learning. But when you read books about the Holocaust, which are written by academics, that are research papers or scientific papers, or films which are made about the Holocaust, which are actually not real films, but try to depict what happened, I think one has to be very, very careful, because some of the films that I've seen and some of the books that I've read actually are extremely misleading, and some of them actually romanticize the Holocaust.